Hello and welcome back to Learn CSS on Codecademy. In the following video we left off learning the different ways to include CSS in our HTML. The three ways we learned were inline, also using the style tag, and last was linking our CSS externally. And I promised I would show you guys in the beginning of this video how to do that. So I usually do everything through my terminal as far as creating files and stuff, and I could show you. First off, I'm going to go into my desktop, into my experiment folder, and create a file. And this is my desktop. If I go into my experiments here, you guys can see there's no folder in here called linking CSS. So I'm going to go into my desktop, and I have all these random folders in there. Once I'm in my desktop, I want to go into experiments. So once I'm in there, I'm going to make a folder, make directory called linking CSS. I'm going to change into there. Once I'm in there, I want to touch. Well, I'm going to open the folder. That way we can see what's happening. So you guys can see this linking CSS, which is in my desktop now. If I go there and I go back into experiments and I look here, now inside of experiments, there's that new folder I just created. But anyways, let's come back in here. So now that we're in here, we can touch index.html, and you guys can see it was created in there. I also want to touch styles.css. Next, we're going to get some boilerplate code. So we go into here and do boilerplate HTML. We see our HTML shell. Copy this, go back into Atom, paste it there. Now we have standard stuff. We can do an H1 that says hello world. So right now, if we go into styles and we don't know too much syntax, so I'm going to just show you this. We'll apply it to all the page, and we're going to do a background color red. So right now, if I go in here, actually it's not going to be in there. If I go into, where's my finder, I go into desktop, and I go into experiments, linking CSS, open index. We have our hello world, but the background is not red. And that's because we haven't linked to the folder yet. Even though we have both files inside the same folder, if we don't link to our CSS, then we won't have access to that folder. And by doing that, we simply go in here, and we learned we put it in the head. So here we put our link. The link is going to have rel, and I think that's supposed to be style sheet href, or is it source? Let's look online. I don't memorize this stuff, but link to external CSS w3 schools, and here it is. Copy that, come over here. So rel style sheet type text CSS and href. We're going to change this because we don't have a file called mystyle. We have a file called styles. We're going to put styles. Now, if we come back over here and we refresh this, now we have a whole background red. And okay, so that was linking. I know we already went over that, but that was just the promised challenge. So next it says tag name. CSS can select HTML elements by using an element's tag name. A tag name is the word or character between HTML angle brackets. For example, in HTML, the tag for a paragraph element is a p tag. The CSS syntax for selecting p elements is, and there it is, paragraph, and then we have opening and closing curly braces. In the example above, all paragraph elements will be selected using a CSS selector. The selector in the example above is p. Note that the CSS selector matches the HTML tag for that element, but without the angle brackets. In addition, two curly braces follow immediately after the selector, an opening and closing brace respectively. Any CSS properties will go inside of the curly braces to style the selected elements. In style.css, add a selector for h1 elements. So in here, we're going to add a selector for h1 elements. So note the content of the web page will update because we've already linked index.html and styles CSS for you. So we go here. Inside the curly braces of the h1 selector, you just declared right color, maroon. So here we would just simply do color, maroon. Let's run this, and it should change this h1 here actual maroon color. And as we can see, it did. Let us continue. Class name. CSS is not limited to selecting elements by tag name. HTML elements can have more than just a tag name. They can also have attributes. One common attribute is the class attribute. It's also possible to select an element by its class attribute. For example, consider the following HTML. We have P, class equals brand, Seoul Shoe Company. The paragraph element in the example above has a class attribute within the P tag. The class attribute is set to brand. To select this element using CSS, we could use the following CSS selector. So they do a dot brand. To select an HTML element by its class using CSS, a period must be appended to the class's name. In the example above case, the class is brand, so the CSS selector for it is dot brand. In style.css, add a CSS selector for the HTML element with a class of title. So here we want to select dot title and then run this. Next, inside the curly braces of the dot title selector, you just declared right colored teal. So first, let's see what is class title. We have this h1 here with class title, and it seems to be the only h1. So once we add color teal, it should actually update this h1 to teal. Let's run this, and it did. Okay, let us go to the next. So multiple classes, we can use CSS to select an HTML element's class attribute by name. So far we've selected elements using only one class name per element. If every HTML element had a single class, all the style information for each element would require a new class. Luckily, it is possible to add more than one class name to an HTML element's class attribute. For instance, perhaps there's a heading element that needs to be green and bold. You could write two CSS rules like so. So we have a dot green and a dot bold. So that heading element can have both these classes, a green class and a bold class. And then we could just add it to that heading element. So then you could include both of these classes on one HTML element like this. So we have h1 and we have a class of green and a class of bold. So by doing this, using this in our CSS would apply both rules to this one element. So we can add multiple classes to an HTML element's class attribute by separating them with a space. This enables us to mix and match CSS classes to create many unique styles without writing a custom class for every style combination needed. In style.css, add a class selector that will make the title of the page stand out more by making all of its letters uppercase. Write a class named .uppercase, then write this inside of its curly braces. So in styles.css, we're going to select uppercase class, and we're going to give it a text transform and make it uppercase. Okay, so where inside the index do we have this uppercase class? So let's look at the classes. It seems like there isn't any. So they're probably going to tell us in the next step. Let's run this. So we did do this class, but it doesn't seem anything was uppercased. So we go here, and if we look for, now you can add the class to the title element. Navigate to the index.html. On line 11, there's an h1. Here's our h1. It has this title class. Add the uppercase class to this h1. Now, this should be all uppercase. Let's run this. And as you guys can see, it was applied. So let's go next. So we have ID name. If an HTML element needs to be styled uniquely, no matter what classes are applied to the element, we can add an ID to the element. To add an ID to an element, the element needs an ID attribute. Just like there's a class attribute, there's also an ID attribute. Then CSS can select HTML elements by their ID attribute. To select an ID element, CSS prepends the ID name with a hashtag. For instance, if we wanted to select the HTML element in the example above, it would look like this. So we have hashtag and then the name of the ID, which is large title. The ID name is large title, therefore the CSS selector for it is hashtag large title. So in style.css, add a CSS selector for an element with an ID of article title inside of its curly braces, right? So here we're going to select ID article title, and then we're doing font family cursive text transform, capitalize. Let us run this, see what happens. We did pass. Next, it says navigate to index.html on line 11. Add an ID attribute to the h1 element and include article title as its ID. So we go back here, go to line 11. We're going to include a ID equal to article title. So let us run this. And now we have cursive, as you guys can see here in our h1. Let us go next. Classes and IDs. CSS can select HTML elements by their tag, class, and ID. CSS classes and IDs have different purposes, which can affect which one you use to style HTML elements. CSS classes are meant to be reused over many elements. By writing CSS classes, you can style elements in a variety of ways by mixing classes on HTML elements. For instance, imagine a page with two headlines. One headline needs to be bold and blue, and the other needs to be bold and green. Instead of writing separate CSS rules for each headline that repeat each other's code, it's better to write a .bold CSS rule, .green CSS rule, and a .blue CSS rule. Then you can give one headline the bold green class and the other bold blue classes. While classes are meant to be used many times, an ID is meant to style only one element. As we'll learn in the next exercise, IDs override the style of tags and classes. Since IDs override class and tag styles, they should be used sparingly and only on elements that need to always appear the same. So in instructions on line 13 in index.html, so here, line 13, we got this h6 published 2 days ago. We're going to add a class attribute with a class of publish time. So here we want to do class equals publish time. Let us run it. So did you add the class publish time? Publish time. Run it again. Add a publish time class selector in style.css. So here .publish/time. We're gonna do color gray. Run this. And we have this now gray. Okay, we run this. Okay, next. Specificity. Specificity is the order by which the browser decides which CSS styles will be displayed. A best practice in CSS is to style elements while using the lowest degree of specificity, so that if an element needs a new style, it's easy to override. IDs are the most specific selector in CSS, followed by classes and finally tags. For example, consider the following HTML CSS. H1 class headline, breaking news. So we have here in our styles H1 color red, and then we have the class headline color fire brick. It would do the headline. In the example above, the color of the headline would be set to fire brick as the class selector is more specific than the tag selector. If an ID attribute and selector were added to the code above, the styles within the ID selector's body would override all other styles for the heading. The only way to override an ID is to add another ID with additional styling. Over time, as files grow with code, many elements may have IDs which can make CSS difficult to edit. Since a new, more specific style must be created to change the style of an element. To make styles easy to edit, it's best to style with a tag selector, if possible. If not, add a class selector. If that is not specific enough, then consider using an ID selector. So in index.html, the element on line 11 has an h1 tag, two classes, and an ID. Since ID is more specific than both, its styles will be applied to the element. Let's rewrite the ID of this element to be less specific by creating classes. In index.html, delete the ID attribute on the h1 element on line 11. So index.html, line 11, we're deleting the ID attribute. Deleting ID, let's run this. So now delete the article title over here. Run this. So navigate to style CSS here. Add a class selector named cursive inside its body, right? So here we're doing cursive. Inside of it we're doing font family cursive. Run this. Add another class selector named .capitalize. So here we're doing a .capitalize. We're doing text transform capitalize. We're just separating things here. Run that. Now navigate back to index.html. So we're going back in here. So we erased it from line 11. We're now just going to add those classes. We have title and uppercase. So now navigate to index, replace the uppercase class with the cursive. So the uppercase class is now going to be cursive and capitalized class. So it's cursive and capitalized. So now those two classes we created will be applied now inside of our H1. Let's run this, and there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here. I think that's a good chunk of information for you guys to practice, and pretty much what you should take from this is specificity. So once you know how to link to external CSS, we can create CSS using selectors that select either the element, the tag name, so like the tag letter, like for P it was a paragraph, for classes it was the dot syntax, and then IDs were hashtags. So just practice doing the same thing, create HTML and a CSS file, do the boilerplate code for your HTML, just a basic setup. Don't forget to put your link tag in your head. Once you have your link tag in your head, then you'll be able to link to that CSS file you create, and then all the different selectors we learned about for classes and for hashtags and for regular elements. Just practice them. Create some random stuff in your HTML and select them in your CSS, and in the beginning of the next video we will do the same and just review what we ended up doing here, and then we'll continue on with the next lessons. I'll see you guys then.